get back to Mr. Wilcock. David, a lot of action in Antarctica, man. What is going on? Buzz Aldrin and that whole thing, Carrie. Something's going on down there, and we know it.
Well, I'm going to sketch out some of the basics for you first. And some of this stuff is going to be really obvious to some of your listeners, but for other people, it's going to really hit them by surprise. And this goes back to the Charles Hapgood theory of Earth crustal displacement, the idea that the surface of the Earth could actually have a pole shift and shift on what is the rotational north and south pole of the Earth. So when we get into that, we are posed with a very interesting idea, which is that the island continent of Atlantis that Plato described would fit the description of Antarctica if the Earth's axis was in a different position. And then when we're dealing with the Atlantean flood, which also appears to be the root myth of the flood that appears in the Bible, in Sumerian dialogue where it talks about the saga of Gilgamesh, which the epic story of Noah in the Bible appears to be a very shortened version of the saga of Gilgamesh. You have flood myths in every primordial culture all over the earth, and it appears that this is what it was. So, yes, Atlantis was inundated with water, but also it was then frozen very quickly into ice. Just as an aside, I have some other fresh intel that nobody's ever heard, which I'll give you right now. And that is that, it actually starts out in a really gross way, which is, and I can't remember what the company was, but there was a company that was making pet food, and they tried experiments with animal bodies that had recently been killed in freezing them, and then seeing if the animal could be preserved by basically flash freezing. And what they found was that unless they got it to an extraordinarily cold temperature, it didn't freeze fast enough to avoid the interior being putrefied.
Okay.
So when you look at what's happening with these woolly mammoths and the fact that the Russians that were finding these mammoth and mastodon corpses were actually able to barbecue and roast the meat,
right,
and it was perfectly fine.
That's right.
You're talking about something that's a lot more cold than anything that could happen just by the Earth's poles shifting to the Arctic.
And quickly.
So it appears,
and quickly.
Right. So what actually appears to have happened was that the Earth's atmosphere temporarily was lost in those areas at the poles, and we actually had the vacuum of space itself, which is much, much colder than the Arctic. That space vacuum and space cold temperature was hitting the ground, and that's what actually flash froze these animals, because that's the only thing that works fast enough to get the temperature down that fast,
right,
that they don't putrefy inside. So that's a weird new detail. Anyway, we have now intel that is way more detailed than I have time to get into right now. So again, I encourage everybody, sign up with your email on dwilcock.com, and you'll get the audiobook quality MP3. I post-produced it. I threw all kinds of great audio plugins on it, de-reverbed it, de-echoed it, all that kind of stuff. Sounds amazing, and it's free. So go to dwilcock.com. You can hear me read this. But I want to get into some of the new things that are going to be in Endgame Part 3. Not only did they find ruins down there, and they found these pre-Adamite bodies, but they also have found that a great deal of stuff is underground, and it's very advanced. So in Part 2, we talk about they've already been hauling out the ruins. There's a lot of technological artifacts. Some of the new intel is that they're actually planting a bunch of new ancient technologies that they had stored in warehouses, and they've already set up the cosmic equivalent of the Easter egg hunt. They've already put in muddy areas in which people will dig, and they will appear to find these things uniquely when they go down there. Now, some of my insiders have a real problem with what's being done, because they say, unless this is a really open, civilian-led investigation, not something that's controlled by the cabal, we have no way of gauging the truth of anything. We're already hearing, that they're removing any of the unusual extraterrestrial bodies, And what we do know is that what actually has been found included the fact that these Atlanteans were playing around with genetic modification of organisms, advanced cloning, species made to order, mixing humans and animals together. And this absolutely blew me away, because Corey is telling me this, having no idea that the Casey readings had extensively discussed that the Atlanteans were doing this, that they were taking various mythological creatures that we see, like the centaur, which is, a man's body with a bull head, or the centaur is the horse with a man's body at the top. You have the bull on a body. There's several versions of this type of thing, the animal-human hybrid. Well, apparently, they actually have found the labs where these clones were being made, and they're still there. They found clones that were in various stages of being grown. This area of Atlantis. One of the cool things we found out, which is in Endgame Part 2, is that the pre-Adamites, these beings with elongated skulls that were 12 feet tall, they could have landed anywhere on Earth they wanted, but they specifically chose what's now Antarctica because there was 1.8 billion year old ruins underneath the surface that they were able to re-inhabit and occupy, and their ships were badly damaged. This whole story is so elegantly told in my book, The Ascension Mysteries. I can't recommend it highly enough, because I not only trace the story that the insiders have told, but I have all the photographs of the evidence of their architecture left behind. So this was a group that had been on a super Earth that was now in the position what we would call the asteroid belt. And I show excellent research that the asteroids were, in fact, the rubble from that planet after it blew up. The oceans turned into comets. That's why comets are watery ice, because they are the frozen oceans of this planet. And all of the debris tracks of those asteroids and comets trace back to a singular point of origin. That's the work of the guy who did the exploded planet hypothesis, Dr. Tom von Flandern, who got some of this published in mainstream academic journals.
Right.
So there's already an academic case that the asteroids were a planet. What people don't realize is, it was a planet, and it was a very advanced group that had gotten compromised by AI, and they blew themselves up with the Death Stars. And so, again, Star Wars is a story about them. And some of them survived inside the moon. The moon is a very advanced, it's like a used car. Basically, they got parked here once it was junk. But when I say junk, it still has 10,000 layers deep, 10,000 floors worth of habitable space inside. Many, many groups apparently have gone in there and used it. And the reason why this is done is that you want to have something that can be disguised from your enemies. You want to have something that looks normal, so you have the element of surprise. And it was used to transport people and animals and biosphere type of things, plants, bacteria, seawater, whatever, for terraforming. And when it was no longer able to be used, and this the guesstimate from the inside is that it was approximately 68 million years ago that the moon was parked in orbit around the Earth. And that started tides, and that's what allowed, that when the moon was positioned, it was after the dinosaurs had been destroyed, and they deliberately did that. There were certain ETs that apparently deliberately made sure the dinosaurs got wiped out so the planet could be used for human life, not reptilian life. And there apparently were some reptilian species that got a lot more evolved than we're supposed to think they got. That's another thing that's been covered up, is that there was a sort of reptilian humanoid that evolved at the last minute. I don't know how advanced they got. They might have been killed before they had high technology. But, the damage was so catastrophic that it seems like their civilization basically got wiped away, and we don't find anything that looks like it was made from them. So now we have a moon that is a very highly advanced technological artifact, and there are plenty of scientific data points that show this. When we've tried to land space probes on it, it rings like a bell, suggesting it's a hollow metallic shell. There's so many things. The seas on the moon appear to be very thin layers of material. because they pucker out in a way that they shouldn't, suggesting that there's some kind of a metallic skin underneath. And those are the areas that look like the big grayish, the darker gray circles.
Right.
And then there's all kinds of weird architecture. There's 12-mile tall towers, and I got the pictures of them in the book that were photographed by the Russian space probe Zond 3 when it was going around there back in like 1965.
Well, then you have the monolith on Phobos, right?
Absolutely.
And
I nailed all those things in the book.
Right.
All that stuff is in the book.
And then you got Buzz going down to Antarctica wearing a Mars T-shirt. Did you see that?
Get your ass to Mars, right? It's like, wait a minute, dude.
Slow down.
And then this all comes out right after John Glenn passes away.
Right.
So there's some kind of weird association between astronauts in space and Antarctica. And why the heck was Senator John Kerry down in Antarctica on Election Day? Oh, you wanted to learn about climate change. Give me a frickin' break. You don't need to go to Antarctica to study climate change.
Send somebody else. Right.
You go down there because it's Illuminati Disneyland.
Right. The tweet that Buzz was allegedly connected to Buzz. I don't know if
it wasn't his, but
right.
It's interesting because what we saw was that tweet coming out, and then right after we published this article, we were told, you got to get this out or you're going to get scooped. The first thing that came out was in Daily Star, and it was a more basic level of disclosure. But then the very next day after we put out the article, the Sun comes out with this thing in which they're making allegations about some kind of video that they're alleging was shot back in 2002 of a city under the ice in Antarctica by a mysterious group that disappeared. But they have the video, but they're not sure if they want to show it. I'm thinking, wait a minute, dude. I'm one of the most visible, if not the most visible person in ufology now, as a result of having 2 hit shows on Gaia and all this. If this thing was out there since 2002, do you think maybe somebody would have shot me an email about it in the last frickin' 14, 15 years?
You think?
I've never heard a word about it. And I'm assuming, Jimmy, you haven't either.
Mm-mm.
That, to me, shows it's a setup.
Right.
There is no film from 2002. They're making it up. And it's part of the narrative. They got to set up a story. They got to tell this like a movie. You know, I was talking with colleagues of mine, Dr. Scott Mandelker in particular is the colleague I'm thinking of. And we were talking on the day of 9/11 on the phone. And, you know, both of us knew about the cabal, so this didn't really surprise us. We knew they were getting ready to do something big. And he said, man, you just couldn't have written the movie any better than this. I mean, it's a terrible tragedy, but it's so scripted. They find the passport at the bottom of the tower. Oh, they know it's the Arabs. Oh, well, that means we got to invade Iraq and Afghanistan because it's got to be them that were responsible. Wait a minute. Those are the places where they make the heroin and the oil. What does this have to do with the towers coming down in New York? The hijackers were Saudi Arabian. That's not Iraq. What? and this is the same deal. It's like they're trying to manicure something. They're trying to tell a story, and they're trying to do it in such a compelling way that they're hoping everybody's going to get roped in. And isn't it interesting that right when they're about to tell this story, what are they doing? They're pruning all of the buds off of the alternative media fruit tree. So we're not going to be able to be heard when they go running around with their new banner.
Bingo.
They're going to tell the story their way, and everybody else is fake news.
Bingo.
That's what they're going to try to do here.
Bingo. I mean, you hit the nail right on the head, David. I mean, and see, the thing is, for you and I and this audience, right, the people that we speak to, we get that. We do. But it's playing out just like that. And there isn't really another way to look at it.
Dude, I just want to I want to really give people the 2x4 upside the head right now, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to speak to you, the listener, in case you think that everything I'm saying is a lie and that I'm so full of shit that my eyes are brown even though they're blue, you know.
Right.
Okay. I'm going to talk to you now, you, the listener who thinks I'm full of it. What the heck is going on with the Sun coming out with an article about a city under the ice in Antarctica on the same day, with it 2 hours after we come out with our thing, that we were urged that we had to get out? what the heck is going on, that The Sun, another tabloid, comes out the next day with a much more evolved article about the same thing, with this whole pre-planned narrative. Do you really think that we matter enough that they're copying us because they just are hoping to, oh, that's a great story, let's make up a whole bunch of crap and write about it?
Right.
If you don't believe that there's anything going on in the WikiLeaks emails that's going to expose the cabal, you haven't done your homework.
Right.
You can't look at this thing by having the mainstream point their fingers at it and say, oh, that's crap. And because it's such crap, we're not even going to let you read about it. We're just going to delete it off of your Facebook and your Gmail and your YouTube and everything. Wait a minute. That's what people do when they're guilty. If they had nothing to hide, then why the hell don't they let us read about it?
Exactly.
So they know they're screwed. They know they're screwed. And so they're clipping off all the buds from the tree. So they're trying to roll out this partial disclosure narrative, and it's going to be amazingly cool. Imagine if pretty much almost simultaneously we hear about a secret space program that's got craft that can fly around our solar system. We may get introduced to a group like the Tall Whites or the Greys and say there's actually ETs around, but they're only going to give us one or two. And they tell us that we found Atlantis, and it's Antarctica. Check it out. There it is. And we got, here he is, Buzz Aldrin, before he had his heart attack. Here he is. And it was classified, but now we can release it. Here he is touring the ruins. And oh my God, look at that. The ceilings are so high. It's like a cathedral inside. And look at all this gold inlay. Look at oh my God, these sculptures, they look Egyptian, but they also look Sumerian. What are these inscriptions? It's some other writing. It's kind of like Sumerian, but it's like a pre-Sumerian. And oh my God, look over here. Here's a sarcophagus. And oh my God, we found bodies. And oh my God, here's a technology. And this thing is glowing. And there's this orb that's hovering over the ground. And I mean, people are going to lose their minds. They're going to be so excited about this thing.